2 weeks before the wedding, my daughter sent me a note which read, "You won't be needed at my wedding. I have made arrangements for you to watch everything on TV. My husband's parents don't want you around." I was heartbroken but decided not to react. I calmly replied, "Okay, I wish you well." What happened next was rather unexpected. Would you take a wild guess before you continue the story? What do you think I'd do to her? Maybe you should also tell me what you'd have done if you were in my shoes. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to support us. Now let me tell you everything that happened. I always thought I'd walk her down the aisle. That was the image that kept me going through the harder years, through the long nights working doubles at the plant, through the times I patched up her car with money I didn't really have, through the quiet birthdays after her mother left. I imagined her hand looped through my arm, her smiling up at me, maybe a little nervous, maybe misty-eyed, but grateful. I pictured myself adjusting her veil, whispering something only she and I would understand, and then giving her away, not just as her father, but as the one man who had been there, without fail, every damn day of her life. That image got me through the silent dinners, the growing distance, the teenage years when I became less dad and more chauffeur with a wallet. Even then, I thought, one day she'll see. So when the envelope arrived, just plain white, her handwriting on the front, no frills, no warmth. I opened it at the kitchen counter where I used to pack her lunchbox. I thought it might be something sweet, maybe a letter saying thank you, or her wedding itinerary. I even thought it might be her asking me to write a speech for the reception. But no, it was 3 sentences long. 3 damn sentences that shattered everything. "Dad, you won't be needed at my wedding. I've made arrangements for you to watch everything on TV. My husband's parents don't want you around, and I'm choosing to respect that. No, love you. No, thank you for everything. Just instructions on how to stay away." I didn't throw the letter out. I just stood there for a long time, holding it in one hand while the other gripped the edge of the counter. My knuckles went white. My heart didn't break all at once. It was more like a slow puncture. You know, the kind of deflation that leaves you numb before the pain sets in. I didn't call her. I didn't scream or beg or ask why. I walked to my desk, pulled out my old flip phone. Yeah, I never upgraded, and typed back 4 words. "Okay. I wish you well." That was it. No guilt trips. No passive aggression. Just surrender. But as I hit send, I felt something in me turn cold. Not spiteful. Not yet. Just cold. After that, I sat down with the wedding binder she and I had put together just months earlier. She used to come over every Sunday, spread the pages out across my dining table, and talk excitedly about colors and guest lists and food. "Dad, we can't have chicken. It's too basic." I smiled then, watching her eyes light up. We laughed about how expensive napkins were. I paid every deposit without blinking. Her mother hadn't contributed a cent. The in-laws, from what I'd heard, only offered opinions and complaints. But I was the one who made it happen. The venue, the food, the jazz trio, the damn swan-shaped cupcakes she said reminded her of a childhood birthday. I was the one who made her wedding real. So I took out my receipts. The catering company, canceled. The baker, canceled. The decorator, gone. I even called the chair rental folks and told them to send those gold-rimmed monstrosities somewhere else. Every call was made calmly. No anger in my voice. Just a quiet efficiency, like I was closing a bank account or canceling a newspaper subscription. The vendors were stunned. "Sir, are you sure? This is in 2 weeks." I was sure. She didn't want me there. She didn't want my presence. Then she wouldn't need my money either. I wasn't going to fund a celebration where I wasn't welcome, not as a guest, not even as a shadow. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not her mother. Not my coworkers. Not even my neighbor Joe, who always joked about borrowing my suit for weddings because I cleaned up real nice. I sat in silence that week, letting the house go quiet around me. There were no more wedding texts from her. No updates. No apologies. Just that damn note, still sitting on the counter like a wound that refused to clot. I didn't eat much. Didn't sleep much either. But I didn't cry. That was the strange part. I expected to fall apart. I expected the grief to gut me. But instead, I felt clarity. She had made a choice. And I was going to respect it, just not bankroll it. There was one night, though, about 5 days after I canceled everything, when I almost reached out. I was watching TV, half asleep, when an old home video came on autoplay from my flash drive. It was her, maybe 10 years old, dancing around the living room in a princess dress. I was behind the camera, laughing. She ran up to me, hugged my legs, and said, "Daddy, will you always be at my wedding?" And I had answered, without missing a beat, "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo." I turned the TV off, sat in the dark for a while, but I didn't call her, because she had answered that question herself, in writing. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't peace, no, not quite. It was something closer to a tired kind of resolve, the kind you earn after being wrung out emotionally, like an old sponge. There was no one in my house to check on me. No daughter at the breakfast table pouring too much syrup on her pancakes. No laughter bouncing off the walls. Just me, the smell of burnt coffee I forgot to pour out last night, and the notebook she'd once scribbled wedding notes in, now collecting dust on the arm of the couch. Her handwriting used to make me smile. Big loops, bubbly letters, little hearts above every lowercase I. Now, it looked like instructions from someone I didn't recognize. Someone transactional. Someone cold. I started making calls after my second cup of coffee. I don't drink it for the taste anymore, just the habit. The first call was to the catering company, a high-end group out of town that specialized in custom menus. We had picked them together during one of those sunny Saturdays that tricked me into thinking we were still close. She had insisted on a tasting session, made me try things I couldn't pronounce, and laughed at how I flinched at goat cheese. "Dad, you're such a meat and potatoes guy," she said, and I shrugged, pretending I wasn't just happy to be included. The man who picked up the phone that morning sounded confused when I gave him my name and reference number. "Sir, you're the father of the bride, right? This is scheduled for 2 weeks from now." I told him flatly. Plans had changed. Cancel everything. Refund whatever could be refunded. He paused, offered a hesitant, "Is everything all right?" I just said, "She made it clear I won't be attending." One by one, I went down the list. The jazz trio she had gushed over? Gone. The cake decorator who made sugar flowers by hand? Cancelled. The florist, the delivery drivers, the guy who rented us heaters in case the venue got cold? Each one received the same call, the same emotionless explanation. I wasn't cruel, and I wasn't messy. Just firm. Businesslike. A man withdrawing from something he had no business staying in. By the time I was done, my notebook was a mess of crossed-out lines and refunded invoices. I didn't feel satisfied or vindicated. Just finished. Like I had finally caught up with the reality she had dropped on me in that 3-sentence note. She didn't want me there. Well, now she wouldn't have to pretend I was involved at all. I didn't think about the consequences. Not yet. I wasn't thinking about the day of or what chaos would unfold without food, without chairs, without cake. That wasn't my problem anymore. I was just a man cleaning up his end of a deal that had been broken by someone else. And honestly, after all I had done, after all the quiet years where I showed up without fanfare, helped her move apartments, lent her money I didn't announce, I was tired of pretending that loyalty didn't deserve loyalty in return. If this was what she wanted, fine. But she wouldn't get to have my dignity on top of my silence. I would step away, but not as some spineless ghost who funded a wedding he wasn't welcome at. She wanted distance. She got it. It was later that afternoon that her mother called. My ex-wife's voice always had this sharpness to it, like every word had a serrated edge. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe longer, but apparently the news had gotten to her faster than I expected. "You canceled the vendors?" she snapped, no greeting. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I didn't flinch. "Ask your daughter," I said plainly. She said I wasn't needed. I took her seriously. She scoffed, accused me of being petty, vindictive, selfish. It was rich, coming from a woman who hadn't even offered to split a single wedding bill. "This is going to ruin everything," she hissed. I just said, "Not my wedding to ruin." And then I hung up. The silence after that was heavier. I spent the evening folding laundry, watching a basketball game I didn't care about, replaying conversations I wish I'd handled differently over the years. I thought about her graduation, how I sat alone in the crowd while she waved toward her mother and stepfather in the front row. I remembered birthdays where my gifts were left unopened, dinners where she scrolled on her phone the entire time. And yet, I had kept showing up. Had told myself this was what dads did. They gave without asking. They stayed even when forgotten. But this was a different kind of forgetting. This was intentional. She didn't want me there. She said so clearly. So now I had no obligation to pretend otherwise. A part of me expected her to call, to reach out, even a short message, asking why. But days passed, and there was nothing. Just radio silence, like she'd truly moved on without me. I told myself maybe she thought the in-laws would pick up the slack, or that maybe she believed I'd still pay for it all anyway, like I always had, no matter how little thanks I got. But not this time. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even grieving anymore. I was just done. Done being the backup parent. Done being the checkbook without a seat. Done being treated like an extra in the story I helped write from the very beginning. By the end of the week, I boxed up the wedding binder and the leftover printouts, tucked them in the closet where I wouldn't have to see them. I looked at the now empty fridge that had once held samples of cake fillings and wedding wine. I stood in the kitchen and let the quiet settle. And in that silence, for the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was mine. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before the sun. Not because I had anywhere to be, but because my body didn't know what to do with itself. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, just staring at the floor. There was a suit hanging in the closet, dark gray, pressed, with a pale blue tie I had picked out to match her color scheme. I had bought it months ago, thinking I'd wear it with pride. I remembered checking the mirror to see how I looked in it, imagining the moment I'd take her arm and guide her into the next chapter of her life. Now, it just hung there like a bad joke. I didn't touch it. I didn't even open the closet door. Instead, I pulled on an old sweatshirt and jeans and walked barefoot into the kitchen, feeling the cold floor under my feet like a punishment I didn't deserve. The house was painfully quiet. No last-minute calls from florists. No nervous pacing. No father of the bride duties to carry out. Just silence. I made coffee, even though I didn't want it. My hands shook slightly as I poured it, not from nerves, but from this strange emptiness that had set in. I kept thinking, this was supposed to be one of the best days of my life. Not because of the spectacle or the food or the smiling guests, but because it was supposed to be the day I stood next to my daughter and watched her step into her future with pride in her eyes and gratitude in her heart. Instead, I was an afterthought, a burden, someone her new in-laws had written off as disposable, and she had agreed with them. I turned on the television. That part of the letter, the part where she said I'd be able to watch everything on TV, kept ringing in my head like a cruel punchline. I don't know if she meant it literally, or if it was just a metaphorical jab, but I took it seriously. I knew the venue. I knew there would be live streams, Instagram stories, maybe even a few Facebook Lives. I found the wedding website she had made, the one I hadn't been invited to help build, and sure enough, there was a live link. I clicked it. The screen loaded slowly, and then there she was, my daughter, in a white lace gown that I had no say in. Hair swept up, eyes gleaming. She looked beautiful. There was no denying that. But as I watched, I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel joy. I felt like a stranger peering into someone else's life, someone who had my blood, my last name, but not my place. The guests arrived one by one. I recognized some of them, her friends from college, a few family members who hadn't bothered to ask why I wasn't there. The camera panned across the tables. White linens, tall flower centerpieces. But something else caught my eye. There was no food. At first, I thought maybe the angle was bad. Maybe the caterers were late. But as the ceremony started, as the vows were exchanged under a floral arch I had once paid a deposit for, the camera lingered again on the reception setup. The guests were whispering. Some looked around awkwardly. One woman fanned herself with a paper program. A man in the back was checking his phone repeatedly. And then I saw her, the wedding planner, pacing back and forth, phone to her ear, eyes darting around in panic. My chest tightened. I leaned in closer to the screen, barely breathing. It was happening. The fallout had begun. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But I didn't flinch either. I just sat back, folded my arms, and watched the consequences unfold. No food. No cake. No drinks. Just a beautiful venue full of hungry guests and a ceremony that, no matter how touching, couldn't fill stomachs. I imagined the confusion, the whispers, the in-laws trying to save face. And I imagined her, my daughter, realizing, too late, that I hadn't just been a man with a checkbook. I had been the backbone of the entire day. The phone rang 30 minutes later. Her name lit up on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to answer. I picked up on the third ring. Her voice hit me like a slap. "What the hell happened?" she demanded. No greeting, no pause. "The caterers didn't show up. The cake isn't here. Nothing is delivered. Did you cancel everything?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match her energy. I just said, "Your in-laws didn't want me there." I assumed they had the rest covered. Silence on her end. For a second, I thought she'd hang up. But then she exploded. "You embarrassed me," she shouted. "People are hungry, and everyone keeps asking where the food is. The wedding is falling apart, Dad. I can't believe you do this to me." I took a breath, steadied my voice, and said what had been sitting on my tongue for weeks. "You told me I wasn't needed. That was your choice. I respected it. Don't call me when the consequences show up." Her breathing changed. She was crying now, but I didn't let it shake me. I didn't let it dig under my skin. I'd spent years being her safety net. Not this time. She tried again, softer this time. "I didn't mean it like that. They didn't want drama. They didn't want conflict." I let out a short laugh. "And you thought cutting out your own father days before the wedding wouldn't cause any?" She didn't answer. And then I said it. Words that sealed the door shut. "Don't call me again." And I hung up. The quiet after that wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, but it was mine. The silence that followed that phone call didn't feel like an absence. It felt like a boundary, one long overdue. For the first time in years, I had drawn a line, and I hadn't rushed to erase it the moment someone tripped over it. After I hung up, I placed the phone face down on the table and sat there, hands folded, like a man waiting for the verdict after delivering his last piece of testimony. There was no sense of triumph, no surge of justice, just a hollow sort of stillness, like the kind that lingers after a house has been emptied out. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad in the same way. What I felt was something quieter and harder to shake. I felt done. Done explaining myself. Done chasing her approval. Done holding my breath for a sliver of the closeness we once had. That evening, her mother called again, and this time I let it go to voicemail. I listened later, sitting in the recliner I used to fall asleep in after long shifts, the one she used to crawl into when she was small, curling up on my chest like a cat. Her mother's voice was high-pitched and sharp, a familiar blend of panic and blame. "What you did was cruel," she said. "She's devastated. Do you even care? Do you realize how this looks?" I didn't call back. What could I say that would be heard without being twisted? That I cared, deeply, but had grown tired of being humiliated in private and expected to show up like a smiling prop in public? That being a father didn't mean being a doormat? She wouldn't understand. She never had. And honestly, I didn't know her that kind of explanation anymore. The fallout didn't stop there. Over the next few days, the messages trickled in like slow poison. A cousin texted, saying I had gone too far. A family friend called to check in, but quickly veered into a lecture about forgiveness and optics. "You should have just let it slide for her big day," he said, as if my role was to be the silent martyr in the background of someone else's celebration. One of her bridesmaids messaged me directly, saying the food debacle had ruined the reception and that I should be ashamed. I stared at that one for a long time. Ashamed. That word sat in my throat like smoke. No one asked how I felt watching my daughter cut me out like an infected limb. No one asked what it meant to pour yourself into someone's future and be told to sit home and watch it unfold like a stranger. No one asked me if I was okay. And for the first time, I didn't care that they didn't. 3 days after the wedding, she texted. Not a call this time. Just a short message that read, "I regret how it happened. Things got out of hand. I wish it could have gone differently." That was all. No apology. No real ownership. Just a thin layer of regret spread over a pile of hurt. I read it twice, then placed the phone on the table again, staring at the wall while the room grew darker around me. I didn't reply. What was there to say? I already knew how she felt. She made it clear in that letter. I wasn't wanted, not truly. Not in a way that mattered. And now that the consequences had arrived, she wanted to pretend like it was all just a misunderstanding, a misstep, a blip in communication. But I didn't buy it. Not anymore. The truth was, I had ignored signs for years. Little slights that I had brushed off because I didn't want to seem bitter. Being left out of parent meetings. Hearing about milestones from other people. Watching her grow closer to her mother's side of the family while I hovered on the outskirts, invited but not included. I told myself it didn't matter. That love wasn't measured by proximity or credit. But when she told me I wouldn't be needed at her wedding, it wasn't just the words. It was the weight behind them. It was years of quiet dismissal made loud. And no amount of regrets sent via text could rewrite that history. She had chosen her side. And now, so had I. I thought about calling her back, just once, to say everything I hadn't said. I imagined telling her how it felt to be replaced, to be seen as an obligation rather than a parent, to be treated like a checkbook with a pulse. I pictured myself telling her that I had always shown up, not perfectly, but consistently, and that I had given her the best parts of myself without ever demanding repayment. But what would be the point? She wasn't ready to hear it. Maybe she never would be. And I was done begging to be heard. I had already spoken, through silence, through cancellation, through the act of stepping back. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out an old photo album, the thick one with worn corners and a cracked spine. It was filled with snapshots of our life together. Her first steps, her first bike, her first school dance. Photos of birthday parties I planned, vacations I paid for, scraped knees I kissed better. As I flipped through the pages, I didn't cry. I smiled sometimes, winced other times. But mostly, I felt a strange gratitude. I had been there. Fully. Even when it wasn't easy. Even when it wasn't reciprocated. I had loved her the way a father should. And if she couldn't see that now, maybe one day she would. But that revelation wouldn't come at the cost of my dignity. Before bed, I texted her just 2 words back, message received. And then I turned off my phone. I didn't need her response. I already had all the closure I needed. The days that followed were loud. Even though my house remained as quiet as ever. The wedding might have ended, but the ripples hadn't. They spread across family group chats, into whispered phone calls, and eventually into conversations with people I hadn't heard from in years. It's strange how a single act of self-respect, drawing a boundary and standing by it, can stir up more noise than decades of silent sacrifice ever did. I became the villain in some stories, the sympathetic hero in others. I didn't try to control the narrative. I didn't go online to explain myself. I didn't write long messages to anyone. But still, the story traveled. It twisted, reshaped itself depending on who was telling it, depending on whether they liked me, hated me, or felt uncomfortable by the idea that a father could actually say, enough. The first call that surprised me came from my older sister, Angela. She's always been a little removed from the family drama, not because she didn't care, but because she learned the hard way that getting too close to the fire meant getting burned. When she called, her voice was softer than I remembered. I heard what happened, she said, from 3 different people, all with different versions. I didn't ask which version she believed. I didn't care. But then she added, just tell me yours. So I did. I told her about the note, the 3 sentences that cut me out, the calm reply I gave, the vendors I canceled, the phone call where my daughter screamed and I stayed quiet. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, good for you. And that was the first time I felt something like relief. Not everyone was like Angela. Some people made it their business to dissect my silence like it was a scandal. An uncle I hadn't spoken to since my daughter's graduation sent me a long Facebook message about family unity and how real men don't take things so personally. I didn't respond. A neighbor across the street, one who'd barely waved at me for years, walked over while I was mowing the lawn and said, heard your daughter had a rough wedding. Something about the food. I just looked at him and said, guess you heard right. Then turned the mower back on. He didn't try again. But the look in his eyes told me he wanted me to explain, to confess, to soften the sharp edges of what I'd done, as if clarity would make them more comfortable. But I wasn't in the business of comforting people who only showed up when there was gossip to digest. The most painful reaction, though, came from someone I used to consider a second son, my daughter's childhood best friend, Mason. He had practically grown up in my house. I coached his little league team, paid for his senior prom tux when his dad couldn't. I always assumed, foolishly, that he would understand who I was at my core. But when he finally reached out, his tone was cold. Look, I get that you were hurt, he texted, but what you did messed up her day. There were better ways to handle it. I stared at that message for a long time, hands trembling with a mix of rage and heartbreak. I wanted to respond with every memory, every late-night ride home, every dollar spent, every conversation where I had poured into both of them like they were my own. But I didn't. I deleted the thread. Sometimes, the betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from people who you thought would always see your heart, but instead choose to judge you by your silence. Still, in the midst of all the noise, there were quiet nods of support. One came from a former coworker named Joel. We hadn't spoken in a while, but he emailed me after hearing a watered-down version of the story through mutual friends. "You don't owe anyone your presence where you're not respected," he wrote. "It's okay to be done." That line stuck with me. I wrote it down and pinned it to the corkboard in my kitchen, right above an old photo of my daughter and me at her 12th birthday. She was laughing, cake on her nose, my arm wrapped around her shoulders. Back then, I thought our bond was unshakable. But time has a cruel way of testing your faith in relationships. Some endure. Others reveal their fragility. I started noticing a shift in how I carried myself. Not physically. I still woke up early, still made my own coffee, still took walks in the evening to clear my head. But emotionally, I wasn't as hollow. I didn't jump at every buzz of my phone. I stopped checking her social media, stopped replaying that call in my mind. I had done what I believed was right. And even though the world around me tried to twist it into something cruel or petty, I knew the truth. I had not ruined her wedding. I had simply removed myself from a narrative that had already written me out. And if people didn't like that, if it made them uncomfortable to see a father say no more, then that discomfort was theirs to sit with. Still, late at night, when the house creaked and the silence stretched long, I sometimes thought about the aftermath she must have been sitting in. I imagined her looking around the reception hall, realizing what it meant to lose not just a vendor, but a father. I imagined the look on her face when she saw the empty cake table, the unserved food, the guests murmuring under their breath. I wondered if she had cried, not out of anger, but out of recognition. If, just for a moment, she had felt the absence of something deeper than logistics. But I didn't cling to those thoughts. I let them come, then let them go. I wasn't trying to punish her. I wasn't waiting for her to grovel. I just needed her to know that her choices had weight. And so did mine. By the end of the week, the buzz died down. The gossip moved on to someone else. The texts stopped coming. The phone was quiet again. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't expected to feel again. Not joy, not pride, but strength. The kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't post, doesn't explain. The kind that sits with itself, steady and grounded, knowing it made the right call, even when it cost everything. It's strange how silence, once unfamiliar, eventually becomes company. Not comforting exactly, but present, honest, even. In the weeks that followed the wedding, the house no longer felt like it was missing something. At first, I kept waiting for the sound of a knock at the door, a voice on the phone, some dramatic gesture that never came. But when none of it happened, when her silence confirmed that she had no real intention of facing what she'd done, I started breathing differently. Not easier, but deeper, steadier. Like someone who had finally stopped gasping for air that would never come. It was quiet now, yes, but it was mine. I had built this life, this space, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was on standby for someone else's needs. Every so often, I'd pass by the wedding binder I had stashed away in the hall closet. I never opened it again. Didn't need to. I knew what was in there. Proof of effort. Reminders of the man I had been willing to be for her, even when she no longer saw me that way. It wasn't bitterness that kept me from looking inside. It was clarity. I didn't need to revisit what I already knew. I had shown up. I had given without keeping score. I had loved her through every silence, every cold shoulder, every time she prioritized someone else's approval over my presence. And when she finally said it out loud, that I wouldn't be needed, I had listened. That was what they couldn't understand, all those people who judge from the outside. I didn't retaliate. I just took her at her word. I saw pictures from the wedding eventually. Not because I searched for them, but because people shared them, as people always do. Someone tagged an old family photo on Facebook, me included, of course, back when we were still pretending to be a family in those annual Christmas shots, and one of the related posts brought me to her wedding album. She looked radiant, I won't lie. There was joy on her face. But there was also something missing, and I don't mean me, necessarily. I mean presence. Real presence. There was a stiffness in the smiles, an undercurrent of tension you could almost feel through the screen. I noticed her eyes, how they didn't quite relax. And I noticed the cake table again. Empty. A beautiful sign that read sweet beginnings, but no cake in sight. That picture stayed with me more than any other. Not because of what was missing, but because of what it said without words. There are consequences for every decision, even the ones you think are small. Eventually, someone, I think it was a cousin, reached out and said she and her husband had moved into a new apartment. Maybe you could send a card, they suggested. I said nothing. What kind of card do you send a daughter who disinvited you from her life? Not with rage, but with chilling precision. Congrats on your estrangement? Glad your wedding had enough drama to last a decade? I don't hate her. That's the hardest part to explain. I don't walk around filled with rage or bitterness. I walk around with a wound. Yes, but it's clean. It's not festering. It's not infected with hope or longing anymore. It's scarred over. And maybe that's what healing looks like sometimes. Not closure, not reconciliation, just acceptance. I started making little changes in my life. Small ones. I replaced the dining room table, the one she used to sit at when she was little, swinging her legs, making up stories about her stuffed animals. The wood had gotten chipped over the years, stained with coffee rings and the scribbles of her younger self. I gave it away to a local shelter. Bought a smaller table, just 2 seats. Enough for company if I ever wanted it, but not big enough to wait for people who didn't plan to show up. That felt symbolic in a way I didn't admit to anyone, but I knew what it meant. My table, my terms. If someone wanted a seat, they'd have to earn it. Not with apologies, necessarily, but with effort, with truth, with presence. There were moments, quiet, aching moments, where I still missed her. Not the version of her that rejected me, but the girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms, who made me pinky promise that I'd be at her wedding long before she even knew what love meant. I missed the sound of her laugh echoing down the hallway, the way she used to call me Dad, with affection instead of formality. And sometimes, I'd wonder if she missed me too. If the silence weighed on her like it did on me. If she ever sat at her new table, surrounded by her new life, and felt the ghost of what used to be. But I never let those thoughts pull me back. Missing someone and allowing them to hurt you again are 2 different things. One Saturday morning, I ran into an old friend at the hardware store. We used to coach our kids' soccer team together. He hadn't heard the whole story, but knew enough to ask cautiously, "You and your daughter doing okay?" I looked him in the eye and answered truthfully, "We're not talking right now. That's her choice. I made mine." He nodded slowly, like he didn't fully understand but respected the finality in my tone. "That's tough," he said. "Family stuff always is." And I just smiled, small and tired. "Yeah," I said, "but not drawing the line. That's tougher. The truth is, love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude. And I had served long enough. I'll always be her father. That's a title no ceremony can strip away. But being her emotional punching bag, her financial safety net with no seat at the table, that job is over. If she ever comes back, it won't be to the same man. It'll be to someone who knows exactly what he's worth, and who won't let blood be an excuse to forget it again. If you've ever had to draw the line with someone you love, you know the pain of choosing peace over presence. This story isn't about revenge, it's about self-respect. Sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is step back and let someone feel the weight of their own choices. If this resonated with you, leave a comment and tell your story. And if you believe more people need to hear what it means to set boundaries with family, like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more real, raw stories about family, choices, and standing firm in your worth. See you soon in the next one.